Welcome to the March update. So we're obviously going into retrospect. Landon McKernan, Mark Cassell here to talk about some deal stories as well as some recent trades. Wanted to go over a property that we've got listed actually in the Southeast Valley. We've been working on for a little bit. I'll let Landon run with it a little bit and go over the details on it.
Yeah, this one goes back quite a ways. We've been working on this one for almost a year now. Initially listed it back in June of 2023. It's been a really challenging listing for multiple reasons. One being, and I'll set the stage for you. You walk into the building, you look around, it's floor to ceiling packed with boxes and just things that have accumulated over the past 20 years that the owners own this building, which is actually more common than people think. But it's been a very challenging property to show. We got a lot of interest. It's in a great location. The size range is great. It's about 10,000 square feet. But a lot of people had a hard time envisioning their companies in it, and they walk in and just think deferred maintenance to the max.
Yeah.
And how much money am I going to have to put into this thing? So we had it under contract once. The first buyer ended up dropping out, just factored in too much capital expenditure. It was going to be over budget by the time they were able to close on it. The second buyer actually was concerned about the city and having to sprinkler the whole building, all the work that it's going to take to do that, and also the tenants being able to get out in time. Yeah. Obviously, there's month-to-month tenants, but with how much stuff the tenants had there, people were really concerned that they wouldn't be able to get out in time for them to move in. So, and that's one of the ways we were able to help this listing is start working with those tenants, find them a lot to lease, actually off market. So once they moved out, activity really spiraled, and we're able to find that perfect buyer that needed the building.
Yeah, I guess what would be the lesson learned or the moral of this story here?
Yeah, the lesson learned would be take more time up front, really set those expectations with the seller of what we can do to get this building show ready.
Yeah.
So start cleaning it out before listing, get the building painted, which we did.
Yep.
And then also relocate the tenants. They weren't a very attractive use. Yeah. It was in a couple auto tenants, and people had big environmental concerns over it. Yeah. So
that comes up a lot. And then also what you said about the fire sprinklers. The building wasn't sprinklered, and that's a huge thing, especially for retrofitting properties today and then getting it approved with the city. That's a huge concern, and obviously it's very costly. Also depends on where the water line is and if you can tap it. If it's close enough, that's good. If it's across the street and you've got to go digging, then it's going to be way more expensive and it's going to cost you a lot of time.
Yeah, it's a really common theme with these 80s built buildings too. Most of them weren't sprinklered. The ones that are in really good shape now. Yeah. I mean, we've seen quotes from other buildings that weren't sprinklered, and we're looking at $200,000-300,000 just depending on what needs to be done. So it's not a cheap item to do by any means,
but definitely worthwhile when it does get done.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. We had two closings over the last month. One was out in Mesa, and I guess with that whole process, it was interesting in the sense that it was an off-market listing where we had the relationship with the seller. They didn't want to go public on the market with everything, but it did make the listing process a little bit more difficult than the traditional marketing timeline. Granted, I mean, you and I both know if we did put it out there live and have it officially out there, having multiple eyeballs looking at the property, it would be a lot more competitive, and I think we would have gotten it done sooner than later. But definitely lesson learned there, I would say, is be more upfront and aggressive with pushing it on the market. But ultimately, it's the seller's call.
So why do some sellers not want to put the listing out there and just wait and see if we can get an offer off market?
I think it's a multitude of things. First thing is their employees. They don't necessarily want a sign out in front of the property. It can cause a disruption in business. I think Two, they want to see if they can find the right buyer and maybe not fully commit as well with not putting it on the market. So those are the two things I would probably say is the most common theme.
Yeah. That's a really good point as far as employees not knowing. A lot of people are afraid of the optics. What are my customers going to think if they see a for sale sign on the front of the building? Do they think I'm going out of business?
Yeah.
Do they think we're relocating entirely? Are my employees going to start looking for other jobs?
Yeah.
When most of the time that's not the case, especially if the company's staying in town, just moving and expanding. It's actually a good thing. They're growing.
Exactly.
But they're just afraid of what other people are going to think.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I mean, super interesting. But yeah, we got that one done. It was very smooth escrow, but regardless, up front, it was a lot of work. So
let's talk about the other building that you've been working on in particular for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
There was a few challenges along the way. What happened with that one?
Yeah, so another building in the Southeast Valley. I mean, just talk about earning your fee with regards to the deal falling out of escrow multiple times, multiple challenges with the city. We had to go through multiple lot splits for this, with the seller retaining one of their lots where they conduct their actual business. And then we also found out about a week before closing one of the parcels that we had to add a water line, which also delayed the second part of the closing, which also incurred another, six-figure number for the seller at the end of the day to do all those costs with the plumbing, adding the water line, the meter as well, and then obviously going through that lot split process. So
yeah, how long did that take in total from
probably
listing to close?
Oh, from listing, I think it was like maybe 2 years.
Wow.
So like falling in and out of escrow, and then I think we put it under contract in March of last year and then closed March of this year.
Yeah, so it's definitely one of the longest timelines we've had.
Yeah.
I know for sure, but with those projects and getting approval from the city, it's never quick.
Yeah.
So definitely important to be proactive. At least the items that are in your court, make sure that you can get them off to the city right away.
Exactly. City employees, I mean, they're working, 9 to 5. They're not going to necessarily have that urgency. And then there's a lot of days that they're closed. So keep that in mind if you're developing a project or doing a lot split. I would expect more time than usual for something like this. And I think it's only gotten worse since COVID, where people have more of a hybrid schedule as well. So
yeah, and that being said, I mean, they're slammed with new projects going on in the Southeast Valley. All those big box industrial buildings going up. They've got a lot on their plate too.
Yeah. Awesome. Next topic we did want to cover is, what are tenants looking for in new buildings right now?
It's a good question, and really depends on what they do for business. But there's a multitude of factors they're going to be looking for, and if you're an investor, you should be looking for it too, because you want to make sure your building's as leasable as possible. One of the most important is power. So especially if it's a manufacturing use, people are going to want to know if it's single phase or 3-phase power.
Yeah.
And how much power is on site. If there's not a lot, can it be brought in from the city? That's a really expensive thing to do. The next is clear height. This is something that a lot of people need, especially if they're going to be doing storage or distribution. But they're going to be looking for higher clear heights, usually better, which is oftentimes hard to find with some of the older buildings. They want to know if there's grade level loading or a truck well.
Yeah.
If they're getting a lot of deliveries, they're probably going to want a dock or a truck well. Some uses out there also need air conditioning.
Yeah.
Not a lot of buildings have it. And if you do have it, that's a huge marketing feature, big plus. The next is highway access, which obviously there's only so much room along the freeway for buildings, but another important feature. And then a big one's land for outside storage. That's been a feature there's been a ton of demand for over the past couple of years. People want that outside storage for material, for trucks, for just storage of things that they wouldn't have to keep inside, and really helps buildings sell and lease a lot faster if you've got a little bit outside storage, especially if it's going to be fenced.
Yeah, I think that's probably become the most valuable thing for a lot of these industrial buildings that we're working on, is having that excess land to store outside. I mean, it's just an increasingly more favorable thing that like people are asking for when they're selecting sites. So
I agree. And if you don't need it down the line, you can always develop it,
exactly,
expand the building. So there's definitely a lot of value there. Moving into our next topic, let's talk about some of the top mistakes that buyers make, that we've seen buyers make.
Yeah, there's a few. So I think if you're a new buyer, this is one of your first commercial real estate deals, not being prepared for timelines. If you're not being represented by a broker, it's going to be very daunting figuring out timelines with appraisals, inspections, phase one, or really anything else. So making sure that you're staying on track for all those contingencies so that you don't have your earnest money be non-refundable, I think is really key. So having a broker, we highly recommend for a lot of buyers, just because it does help with that timeline as well.
Yeah.
Also, if you're getting a loan, make sure that your financials are in order prior to even opening up escrow. I think it does save a lot of time getting a pre-qual letter from a lender, and obviously that's huge. Typically we're seeing anywhere on due diligence 30 to 60 days if there is financing involved, and then 15 to 30 day close. And another thing that we're not seeing buyers or new buyers actually take into account is not calculating a true NOI. And obviously we're seeing with a lot of the headlines in the market right now, where you're seeing commercial real estate is down, some buyers are coming in extremely low on their pricing and not really looking at what's selling and having accurate comps to provide their offers on. So
I agree. And I mean, it goes back to the old adage, you don't know what you don't know.
yeah,
And a lot of the people that we come across, we're talking to, it's their first time buying a building.
yeah,
And so it can be daunting for sure. They're looking for us for guidance and our relationships with vendors, you know, to get a phase one and Alta survey and inspection. A lot of times they just don't know where to start.
yeah, that's true.
So what would you say are some of the most important things to do during due diligence?
During due diligence, lining up all your inspections within the first, I would say, 3 days. It's going to be seeming like you're in a tornado, but making sure that you schedule all of that up front is going to be huge, or even before. So making sure that you've got multiple vendors to actually hit those timelines, I would expect. If you are getting a phase one and there is a phase two that's recommended, do plan that out, and then obviously ask the seller for some timing. More often than not, they're going to be realistic and give you that extension. If not, maybe there's something else that's fishy going on. So do keep that in mind.
Yeah, and if the building's leased too, really important to ask for that lease, dig through it, see if there's any terms in there that weren't in the initial marketing package. Does the tenant have an option to renew?
Yeah.
If they have an option to buy the building. If they do, you're going to have to get that right of first refusal waived.
Yeah.
And try and get on that early too, because a lot of times they'll have 30 or 45 days to get back to you with a response, which is a really long time.
And that could definitely sideline a deal.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's some top mistakes that you see sellers make?
Well, it really depends. One that we see most often is going to be unrealistic pricing. So a lot of sellers will look to us for our pricing guidance. We'll show them comps, go through the analysis for their property. But a lot of sellers seem to come up with a number that they really want to net after commissions, after closing costs. Sometimes I'm not sure exactly where that number comes from, but it's really important to make sure that you're accurately pricing the market. You're looking at the comps, looking at the active inventory, what are other buyers going to be looking at, and make sure that you're competitive too.
Yeah.
If you're priced way above market, a lot of times people won't even submit an offer. They're afraid to insult the seller. They're afraid of not getting a response. But what we've seen is if you're able to price it more accurately, you'll get multiple different offers. You'll get multiple buyers coming in looking, really driving up the price, and at the end of the day, netting you a higher amount.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen time and time again. Like the more appropriately priced listings, one sit on the market way less, and exactly what you said, it gets way more competitive, and the pricing tends to go up.
I agree. Yeah. Another one is going to be not using a broker. So that's a big one. And we've talked with some owners that decide they want to try and sell the building to themselves, either to the tenant or to somebody else they know that wants to buy it. And the main reason they do that is obviously to save on the commission. Which is going to be a few percent on the sale value. But we've seen a number of cases where we end up seeing someone sell their building at hundreds of thousands less than what we think is the market value, just to save a fraction of that in commissions.
Yeah, it's sometimes very significant like that. I mean, one example was, $40 or $50 a square foot off of what they could have gotten. So pretty immense value. So it does happen more often than you think.
I agree. We always recommend putting your building on the market if you can attract multiple interested parties, get all the eyeballs looking at the property instead of just one buyer. You're probably going to end up with a higher price. You're going to find that person that needs it the most.
It's true. What do you think, mistakes that sellers make on the investment side of things? I know we've seen it, with owner users in the past too, but more so on the investment side.
On the investment side of things, we've talked with a lot of investors that either try and write leases themselves, so they don't hire an attorney or a broker. And in a lot of cases, we see under market rents. We'll see people not making sure that they have market annual escalations in their leases. And just at the end of the day, agreeing to unfavorable terms without realizing that really affects the property's value. So they'll come to us hoping to sell the property without realizing that their under market lease makes the property worth less.
It happens more often than you think. So very interesting. I guess, what would you say separates a good listing broker from a bad listing broker? We see a lot of properties on the market. We're tracking everything that hits every single day. But what would you say separates the two? And I feel like it's pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. One being, find a broker that's going to be proactive for you. One that's going to put in the work, not wait for inbound calls, not wait for leads to come their way, but we'll get out there, try and find the buyer, find the tenant, and really make sure you're getting the best deal. And that's something that I know we really pride ourselves on, is being proactive. So what are some of the other things you're seeing out there?
I think it's really back to the basics of doing your homework, looking at the comps, talking to lenders. What is this realistically going to trade at? Yeah, you can add a little bit of a buffer for negotiation, of course, but doing your research and going that extra mile on showing your value and earning your fee. You made a really good point about putting in the work, doing the outbound calls. I think what we saw a lot of during COVID that created a lot of bad habits for a lot of brokers was they were just getting bombarded with inbound leads and they didn't really have to do anything. They just put it on the market. Now it's very different where you've got to be a very active broker. You've got to do those outbound calls. You need to canvas. You need to really work your listings and earn your fee to actually get a deal done and be knowledgeable about it. I think that's a really huge differentiator between a good and a bad listing broker.
I agree. Another thing we see a lot is people going outside of their area of expertise. I know some brokers out there are generalists, which is totally fine. We try and stay in our lane, but we do see a lot of times, especially industrial buildings, get listed with residential agents. A lot of times it's a family friend or someone that they have a personal relationship with, but at the end of the day, it's doing you a disservice, and it's also doing that agent a disservice if they're listing a building that they're not as familiar with and not experienced with that asset type.
I agree. I mean, we put in so much work, and even our competitors with the database, knowing the market, looking at the comps. I mean, if you're not doing this day in and day out, you really don't know the nuances with each property, each submarket, and each deal. So I agree. You're definitely doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, that and working with a broker that has those relationships in the field too.
Yeah.
Who's going to be the broker that knows the neighboring building owners, knows the tenants in the area,
Yeah.
what type of companies want to be there, and what they're looking for too.
Yeah, that's huge. I would say another thing too that we didn't touch on is having those hard conversations up front. That's really huge, especially right now where we're in a very interesting market. Going back to, we really have to work these listings, but bringing up all the bad news up front with your seller is going to save you so much time on the back end. So
What kind of bad news are you talking about?
bad news with like what we were talking about a little bit earlier on, maybe leases that are under market, maybe the property's not managed to the best of its abilities, going over maybe some disadvantages, some deferred maintenance that might hinder you on the market. Essentially, you're telling your seller, this is how a buyer is going to look at it, and this is what they're potentially going to negotiate as well. So providing that ammunition up front, I think, is imperative to, prepping them for what's going to happen on the market.
Yeah,
Preparing for the worst.
That's a big thing with the deferred maintenance. A lot of sellers don't think that it's going to come up, or they underestimate the expense it's going to take to complete that maintenance. But at the end of the day, the buyer's looking at it like, what am I going to have to do day one when I take over this property?
Yeah.
Am I going to have to put a new roof on for 30 grand?
Yep.
And that's something that they might end up negotiating off the price.
Yeah.
So just something to keep in mind. It doesn't necessarily make sense to do all of that work prior to listing, but as long as the seller is aware of what they're selling.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Awesome. Well, I think we're ready to move on to some trades if you are. So obviously we had quite a bit that we will highlight. We'll keep it nice and brief, but first one was actually here in Scottsdale. This was off of Monte Cristo, 7434 Monte Cristo, about 28,000 square feet, built in 2001 and sold for $313 a square foot. Obviously, Scottsdale Air Park gets some of the highest price per square foot in the valley. Sold for about $8.8 million at a 6.25 cap. About 52% warehouse, 48% office, 4 drive-in doors and 3 dock high doors. It's got 22-foot clear height and is block construction and has a really good amount of power, about 2,000 amps. Next one is Airport Boulevard. This was the deal that actually took quite some time, falling in and out of escrow a little bit. Had to go through multiple lot splits, adding the water line. Ended up selling that one for about $230 a square foot. And it was block construction, multi-tenant industrial, shallow bay, built in 1989. And it's got multiple grade level doors, has below market leases. It is fire sprinklered, which is really nice. And it is zoned I-1 in the city of Chandler.
The next one's 26 West Lone Cactus Drive in Phoenix. That one's 12,000 square foot. It's a multi-tenant building, shallow bay, industrial center, built in 1985, sold for $2.5 million or just over $200 a foot. Had about 20% warehouse and 80% office, so it's pretty heavy on the office front.
Yeah.
6 drive-in doors, 9-foot clear height. Block construction, 400 amps of power, and was zoned A1 for light industrial. Next one was 170 South William Dillard Drive in Gilbert. This one's just over 3,500 square feet. It was more of an industrial flex condo, which is really in high demand right now. We sold one earlier this year. Built in 2004, sold for $1,050,000, $298 a square foot. Had 18-foot clear height, 1 grade level door. It was block construction and had that private secured yard as well, which is a really attractive feature. Zoned I-1 for light industrial and had 60% office and 40% air-conditioned warehouse.
Yeah, those little condos are really creeping up with high price per square foot on the transaction values. Next one is 3310 West Sherman Street in Phoenix. Sold for about $242 a square foot at $2 million. It's about an 8,000 square foot industrial warehouse built in 1984. It's got 3 grade level doors, metal construction, and is on a little bit over an acre of land. It's zoned A1, and it's got 85% warehouse and 15% office. And then the next one I think was the largest of last month, and it was out in Goodyear. So 3750 South 156th Avenue. It was about 120,000 square feet, built this year, sold for $181 a square foot at $21.8 million. It was 100% leased at the time of sale, 97% warehouse, and then 3% office. 3 drive-ins, 24 dock-high doors, 32-foot clear height, and fully air-conditioned. Also, it's got 2,500 amps of power as well. So,
wow,
that was a mouthful.
Yeah. I'll cover the last trade. This one's in our stomping grounds, 131 South Clark Drive in Tempe. We've sold a couple buildings around the corner from this one.
Yeah.
It's a nice property, just under 15,000 square feet, built in 1986 sold for $2.7 million, $183 a foot. So a little bit lower than some of the other comps in the area, mainly due to the fact it was built out office. A lot of the buyers looking at it were factoring in those demo costs.
Yeah.
Which is something that we're seeing quite a bit right now. People are looking for more warehouse than office. Building was 14-foot clear height, block construction, 3 grade level doors, and had 600 amps of power. Zone GID for Tempe General Industrial District, and that one was initially listed for $3.3 million. So sold for quite a big discount off the ask.
Quite the haircut.
$600,000.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. That's going to be it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in for the trades and some insight into the market right now and some of the things we're seeing out there. We'll see you next time.